In today's video, I'm going to talk about how to create a fine art black and white style photo. I'm starting with this long exposure waterfall photo. That's a natural subject for fine art black and white kind of stuff. And I'm going to convert it into black and white in Photoshop. And we're going to use a very simple technique of bringing out some of the shadows and the contrast in the photo to give it a little bit more depth and make it a bit more interesting. And I'll show you that this was the finished version I ended up with. And that's just using some very simple tools in Photoshop. If you're a Photoshop beginner, you should be able to grasp most of these, particularly if you've used something like the brush. So the first thing I did, let me go back to my original photo, was I did some very basic development on that. And you can see in the development window, I've literally just probably hit auto, in all honesty. And what's it done? It's boosted exposure because the shot was a bit underexposed, changed the contrast and taken up the whites and blacks and stuff. But anyway, so just hitting auto would probably do. The next thing we're going to do is take that into Photoshop, and that's the image here. I'm not going to go through the whole editing sequence from start to finish because I think that's going to make quite a long and boring video. But I'm going to show you the key things that you need to do to get this kind of effect. So let me just go back to the original photo. So the first thing I do, which is pretty standard for any photo, is really just to duplicate that background layer, and that's really just to give me a fallback in case I make some ghastly mistake and I want to go back and start again. Now you need to convert the image to black and white, so go to adjustments and scroll down to black and white, and you can change the preset if you like. Just hover over each of the ones and see which one looks best, or you can just play with the sliders. I think actually for this one I'm going to choose a red filter, and there's my black and white conversion. Alright, and the next thing I'm going to do is I would then create a 50% grey layer, and you do that, or the easiest shortcut way to do it on a Mac is Shift Command N. I'll put up the code on for Windows in text below, and it creates this layer. Now the first thing you've got to do to get a 50% grey fill is change the mode, and I usually change this to soft light. You can choose any of these in the lighting section, it'll work. So let's go with soft light, and now we've got the option to fill with a 50% soft grey neutral colour. And there's the layer there. Now let me show you what I've done on my layer here. So if I just show you this layer here, I'm not sure how well you're even going to see this on the screen, but it's got some little white streaks and things like that, and it's really just where I've brushed onto the screen some of the effects that I want to bring out. And let me show you what I mean by that. What I'm doing is on this layer, I'm taking a brush and highlighting the things that I want to highlight, and then usually darkening things that are in the shadows. So I simply do that. I choose a brush. Now, a couple of tips I can give you: make sure your hardness is turned right down to 0, so it's a nice soft brush. Also, make sure that your foreground and black background colors are set to the default of black and white. And then you just need to paint into the areas where you want to change the effect. So I would choose, let's say, black, because maybe we want to highlight this bit behind the waterfall where the rocks are showing through. And I would set my opacity to something pretty low, around 5% to start with. And the flow, you can leave that at 100%. And you literally then paint into these areas what you want, and you'll see it's just making that stand out a little bit more, so creating a little bit more contrast. Change your brush size here just for this little bit here that is a little bit narrower, and I might do the same on these rocks here in the foreground. Paint all those in because I want them to be a bit darker. Now there are other bits that I want to be lighter, so I'll flick the color over to white and do exactly the same with that. And I might just paint in these little streaks here. I paint in the white highlight bits up here. And that way we're building up layers of texture in our photo just by brushing onto it. Now, a tip I can give you to speed up the process: when you've got somewhere close, one of the things you can do is to just duplicate the layer, and that'll double the effect. So that's what my second layer copy is here. Now you'll see I've set the opacity to about 20%. You can also play around with the lighting style, because it'll change the impact that second layer has, and you might find, you know, you want it again at soft light, but you want to have maybe 30-40% opacity. But play with those till you get the look you want, and that's really all there is to it. Now the beauty of it is, if we just hide that a minute, but if you've made some mistakes on this layer, you can just erase them. So you just pick the eraser tool. Again, if you want to take it completely out and back to 0, set your opacity to 100 and your flow to 100. If you want to just subtly shade out a bit, maybe you've done it, you think, oh, I'll use 10% and it was a bit too much, you can just take it back by erasing, and you're just painting on that layer. So you're not affecting the layer that's got the photo on, you're affecting the fill layer above it, and you can just paint out what you want until you've got the look you desire, and take it back to what it was before. If you're completely unhappy with it, you can bin the layer altogether and just start again. And that's the beauty of this process. It's totally non-destructive, gives you lots of opportunities to play around with different effects and make it work for you. Once I've done that, I'll probably read it back into Lightroom, and the only other thing I would probably then do is add a vignette, and I might just tweak a little bit, some overall changes. If I feel perhaps I've gone too dark, I might want to bring up the shadows a little bit more or something. I felt the photo was a little bit too dark, and just bring up the blacks a bit so there's not too much pure black in there. And there you have it. That's one way of creating that fine art style of photography. Hope you found that useful. Go out and have some fun with your camera, and I'll see you in the next video.